Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Philp. I'm Art Fund's Director of Programme and Policy. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to all the Art Fund supporters in the audience. I hope everyone is settled with a cup of tea or maybe even a glass of wine, because this afternoon we're going to hear from three fantastic speakers about how museums and galleries are engaging their visitors in the wake of COVID-19 with Art Fund's help. So I hope that the discussion will give you a taste of how your support is having a meaningful impact on museums and galleries and all of us who enjoy them. Over the past 6 months, as you know, museums and galleries across the UK have been facing unprecedented disruption and have had to radically adapt the way they work, share their collections, and critically engage their visitors. Earlier this year, we launched our Respond and Reimagine grants to help support museums and galleries in the face of some quite desperate times. And we have been overwhelmed, not just by applications, but just so inspired by the innovative ways that all our fantastic museums and galleries have been adapting and finding ways to stay connected to their audiences. As we have all been able to travel less, many museums have devoted their resources to new and different projects with their local communities, taking their work and their collections outside of their usual context. And we are all, of course, including Art Fund, learning how to do a lot more online. And from the very beginning of the first lockdown in March, museums and galleries have been at the very forefront of adapting themselves and their expertise to a new digital way of life. So now, it's enough from me. I am very pleased to introduce the panel, who all work at museums and galleries recently supported by Art Fund and who are tackling the pandemic and reaching their visitors and would-be visitors in exciting new ways. Firstly, Amy Seadon, Learning and Community Engagement Manager from Aerospace Bristol. Aerospace Bristol is a museum dedicated to celebrating Bristol's unique relationship to aeronautical and space technology. Their collection consists of hundreds of exhibits from small model aircrafts to helicopters, rockets and missiles, and of course Concorde, the last of the iconic supersonic passenger jets to be built and the last to fly. Bristol Aerospace was recently awarded a Respond and Reimagine grant to support a digital project called Aerospace Lives. Thank you very much for joining us, Amy. Next up, Karen Buchanan, Curator at Gairloch Museum, recently crowned joint winner of the Art Fund Museum of the Year for 2020, and many congratulations, Karen. Gairloch Museum is located in Wester Ross, overlooking the loch, and in 2019 they completed a huge transformation, moving to a refurbished nuclear bunker after raising a staggering 2.4 million, an effort which was led by an army of volunteers and locals. Karen, thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, Trish Scott, Engagement Curator from Goldsmiths Centre for Contemporary Art. Based in South London, the centre provides a space for artistic practice and hosts world-class exhibitions by international artists, new commissions, historical presentations, survey exhibitions, and long-term research projects. Goldsmiths CCA was awarded an Art Fund project grant to help them realise an artist-led project within their local Lewisham community titled Room to Room. And it's great to have you here, Trish. Thank you for joining us. Now, as we hear from our panel, I'd also like to invite all of you in the audience to get involved and pose any questions. And as Scarlett said, we will try to answer as many as we can during the course of the next hour. And so, to kick off the discussion, I'd like to start by asking the panel to tell us a little about their projects and how, with Art Fund support, they've been able to reach out to both their existing visitors and new communities through these challenging times. Trish, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. Your project, Room to Room, was devised in response to the COVID-19 lockdown and paired artists with vulnerable residents from the London Borough of Lewisham to explore and test the value that art can have in supporting people through and beyond a time of crisis. I'd love to hear a bit more about this project and the impact that it's had on this section of the community.
Thank you. Yes, so since this summer, we've had 6 artists based in Southeast London entering into dialogue with 6 residents living in Lewisham. And I think with lockdown, as we all know, isolation has been really compounded. and for people living alone in sheltered accommodation with low digital inclusion, so without access to smartphones and computers, having the shared spaces or communal spaces closed off has literally kind of confined some people to the four walls of their rooms, really disconnected. So Room to Room was really set up to support residents living in these circumstances. And to think about how, I guess, art can play a role at this time of social distancing in order to build solidarity and connectivity. So practically, projects got underway, and they were centered, because of the issues around kind of digital connectivity, centered around weekly phone calls, and evolved over time to include other forms of communication. But I suppose different pairings, these 6 pairings, have evolved distinctive patterns and rhythms for staying in touch. Each dialogue have resulted in different artworks made for or with individual residents. And there's a newspaper which will be distributed to other vulnerable adults in sheltered accommodation in the borough that's currently in production. So there's some images that I'll go through now just to give a flavour of some of the exchanges that have taken place. So what you can see at the moment, the comic strip reflects on the actual process of artist Ben Connors and his partner Carmen getting to know each other. The process of passing time together, improvising with words and ideas over the phone, identifying shared connections, including, you can see some plants there, gardening, and also a love of animals, and giving these form through a postal exchange based around drawing and storyboarding to create a series of comic strips. Room to Room's obviously taken place, next slide is fine, in the midst of a pandemic that's brought social, racial, and economic inequalities into stark focus, and navigating difference in relation to age, ethnicity, politics, ideas about art is something that's also been part of this project, as well as navigating illness, loss, bereavement, complex personal circumstances on both sides. So I guess it's, to point out that the work taken to kind of build these connections through these immensely challenging circumstances can't be underestimated when you're relying just on that phone line as your sort of immediate through line. So these visuals created by artist Shepherd Manika, incorporating photos taken by his partner Nigel, reflect in a layered way on the actual expectations around what it means to connect, delving into personal roots and histories, and examining the difference between crossing paths and what it means to actually build rapport. If we move to the next slide. So this is artist Alicia Rogalska holding up a piece of fabric for her partner Ida to look at. You can see Ida on the next slide looking out through the window there. So Alicia and Ida connected over both being migrants, both longing for home in different ways. And the final piece created in the exchange actually was a bespoke fabric featuring the Coco del Mar, a symbol of the Seychelles. It's not actually this image, but Ida is going to sew it into a dress for her daughter. I've included this image and this sequence of images as they illustrate communication that's about, I suppose, gesture and performance, literally crossing a physical barrier, sort of finding a way to communicate through glass. And I quite like this because I suppose it's playing with literally changing the kind of what you're looking out onto, what can be done, playing with that sort of that very confined space. So all of these projects are really bespoke, and I think highlight the difference as well between making art for a general audience and making art with or for a single other person. So if we move to the next slide, this prayer mat's been made by artist Tyrese Holder for her partner Sylvia. It's not a representation of a prayer mat, so something to be looked at in a gallery, but something that's been designed for Sylvia to use every day at home. The design reflecting Tyrese's understanding of Sylvia's spirituality and taste, and delivered as part of a really elaborate birthday hamper, which I think are reflective of Tyrese's words. I think I've gained another grandma as a sort of outcome of this exchange. And it's a really different presentation of work to how you might find in a gallery, and I think raises really interesting questions about what happens to art and artistic practices when you're very specifically driven by different audience or community kind of needs and ideas. So the last slide just contains some reflections. This is from a collaborative writing exercise the artists undertook. And I think for residents, the project's created friendships. So for 3 of the 6 pairings, this doesn't feel like we're reaching an end point, but more a punctuation point in terms of relationships and practices that might continue, mediated through conversation and also different materials, whether that's wool, fabric, pen and paper. And for residents, the project's provided a new kind of connection, one that's not about the kind of day-to-day physical support needs, but a space for reflecting with someone on challenges, playing with ideas, having skills and experiences recognized and validated, and experimenting with giving these different physical forms. So I'll stop there. That just gives an insight, but I'll look forward to talking more about the project.
Thank you so much, Trish. Such a kind of rich project, and lots more to discuss, definitely. Karen, turning to you now, the refurbishment and move of the museum to the new site was an enormous undertaking. It took several years, and the local community at Gairloch played an absolutely pivotal role in its success. And I'd love it if you could speak briefly about your experience of working with the local community to realise this kind of hugely successful milestone for the museum.
Sure. I think you have some images, Sarah, of our building before and after. Just maybe you can flip through those while I'm talking. Gairloch, I think, as you said at the beginning, is an independent museum. It was set up by volunteers from within the community over 40 years ago now. So the community is very much at the heart of the museum. And when the project started 8 years ago, I arrived just after it started, and I was the only member of staff. So everyone else involved in the project was a volunteer. And as you said, we had eight years, probably the last 18 months of which were actually creating the building. There's a lot of fundraising went on before that. And I think for me, I remember at the opening ceremony, we actually had a sort of pre-opening before our official opening. The day before, we invited the community in and everyone who had helped us. And I remember standing up to talk at that and saying how I just really felt that I had been swept along on a tide of enthusiasm throughout the whole thing by the community. It is a very special community here. We are remote, and we know each other, and it doesn't take long to find somebody to help you if you do need help with something. And there's a fabulous range of skills within the community as well. And that extends from practical skills, the sort of intellectual and research skills, but also just the collective memory of the community as well. So for example, if I get an archival inquiry, I don't have to go very far to find somebody who can kind of trace back family relationships and that kind of thing. So there's lots of wonderful qualities within this community that make my job an awful lot easier. And so we had about, in the end, or in total, we had about 120 volunteers involved in the project. And that's from a community where the wider parish, the population is only about 2,000 people, less than 2,000 people. So it's a large chunk of the community. And they were involved very much in the fundraising side of things. Many people gave very generously themselves. And also in the interpretation, the construction of the building, the creation of materials like our interactive listening posts. We dragged people in with local voices and got them to record things for us. We got our vernacular Gaelic speakers involved in our Gaelic displays, and the local Scottish Natural Heritage officers involved in the natural history displays. So there was community involvement at every level. And I suppose in one way, I was managing this as the museum professional, but I was also very much led by what the community input was, and what it was obvious that the community wanted from the project. And that was partly organic, just in having so many members of the community involved, but also because we did at certain points throughout the project go out and ask people whether they liked what we were planning or not. We did a lot of groundwork, I think, in making sure that the community was involved. Informed, that the community was informed by everything that we were doing. And I think that really stood us in good stead. And I think as a result, you know, when we won the Museum of the Year award, it really felt like it was an achievement for the community and not just for the museum.
That is fantastic, a huge achievement, and a real testament to the kind of the power of community as well. Thank you very, very much, Karen. Lastly, Amy, please tell us a little bit more about your new project, Aerospace Lives, and how you hope it's going to connect you to your community, both digitally and ultimately, we hope quite soon, in person with your audiences.
Okay, cool. I think you've got some pics of my museum, etc. as well. Yeah, so Aerospace Bristol, we're quite young. We're just 2 years old now. And I think when we first opened, what people really assumed we were was the Concorde Museum. So obviously, here this is Concorde. I think that's what everyone was expecting when they came to see us. But it's a huge amount more than that. It really is as much a community museum as it is a museum just about aerospace. Concorde means a huge amount to everyone in our local area, because I would say most people have at least one relative who worked on or was part of that project. And so that's hugely important in our community. But also, if you click onto the next slide, you'll see there's a huge amount more to our collection and our story than just that Concorde project. And our whole community sort of grew as a result of the aerospace industry coming to that area, and it built up because of that. And the sort of like ebbs and flows and changes have really affected our community, and it's a huge part of their history. And so we've always had this sort of really strong link through our volunteers and through the working relationships we've had with older people in the community, sort of telling that story. So I mean, if you flick on again, I've got a couple of pictures of doing a bit of community engagement in and around and talking to different people, and you can see how it really does mean a lot to them, and they've got a lot of stories to tell. My final picture is something which we've been doing since we very first started, which is collecting people's stories and starting to share them digitally. You can see this is someone's memory of working for the Bristol Aeroplane Company and what it's meant to them and their life, and there's a huge amount of that. But there's also lots and lots of new people coming into the area. There's lots of obviously new housing estates and younger people who don't necessarily know the background. And so the aim of this project is to help the older members of our community who really have a lot of knowledge of how the community was built and the stories about, you know, not just the aerospace industry, but all the places in and around us. Share that via putting these things online, creating sort of digital trails so people can get out and about, walk around the community and use that information to explore. And then younger people can learn about the area and have a bigger sense of place. So we're really excited to be able to sort of do this face to face and obviously online. And we've already had lots of people really interested in doing events digitally. I think people might say, well, older people are going to be interested in doing things like this. But yeah, they definitely are. So we're really looking forward to gathering those stories, helping them map that out, and sort of having that opportunity to instantly share it with people. So families and children can get out, go walking, see things they didn't necessarily know about their local history, and then come and visit the museum once we're able to open and find out even more, which should be awesome.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Amy. I've got a question from the audience that I'd just like to pose to all of you before we move on. And it is, how have you been trying to reach people who are not tech savvy? And I think that's a really interesting question for all of you in very different ways. And obviously Trish's project is very avowedly kind of lo-fi and kind of old school, and Amy, you're navigating between the sort of real life and the tech, and Karen, you've got this kind of very on the ground kind of passionate community, but also it's kind of quite rural and dispersed, and so how you kind of reach people. So I wonder if you could all kind of maybe reflect on what we kind of in the sector we're calling the digital divide, but is really about how you reach different audiences with different needs and abilities. I don't know who wants to go first. Karen?
Sure, I could just say a little bit. We're aware of the issue. I think in our community it tends to be more elderly members of the community who are perhaps struggling with the technology. We got some funding last year to buy a small library of iPads, and those were actually designed to be used with the House of Memories app, which you may know through National Museums of Liverpool, is for dementia patients and their carers. So we've actually kind of repurposed those and invited people to borrow those. If they don't have any technology at home, they can come and get those. And we've also just kind of observed that people are helping other people. So, you know, I've had some of our volunteers come to me and said, oh, so-and-so wants to watch the talk next week. So I've said I'll go round and show them how to do it. So it kind of seems to be happening organically as well. And one other thing that we had offered people was that we're very lucky that we've been able to remain open up here, and we have quite a large building. So it would actually be possible for us to do stuff in the building on a socially distanced basis if people wanted to come and do it in person. Yeah.
That's great. I love the community helping each other, a real legacy of all the work that you've done over the last few years as well. Amy?
I think actually what we're doing is very similar to that. We've got some iPads as well. We can't lend them out into the community at the moment. We don't quite have that level of links, but what we were doing is using those to train our volunteers, and then hopefully they can cascade that to community groups as well. And again, our building is very big too, and so we do have the facility to have some socially distant events on site, and to allow for people to come in and do that in person in the local area. And we do have an outreach officer who potentially can go and do some stuff, but we need to develop that in the next few months to see exactly how that works under the current conditions. But that is the long-term plan.
Great, thank you. And Trish?
Yeah, so I think in a sense that was one of the points of Room to Room, and it's so interesting because we're here on Zoom at the moment, but one of the really interesting things about Room to Room is that friendships, relationships are formed, but people still don't know what the other person looks like in all instances, which is really profound, it feels like, in this moment. And I think, we're a very young organisation. So the CCA opened in 2018. So we're really kind of developing relationships with different communities of practice locally. And we also, I suppose, during lockdown, we were able to be very agile and sort of responsive. So one of the projects we also ran was called Down Up, which was an online art school to support families at home. But it's interesting when you think, hang on, who were you reaching through Instagram? So we're then kind of supplementing that through material packs. So thinking about how I think the analog and digital can sort of work together, and trying to work out who you're reaching, who you're not reaching, and that being an ongoing area of work as we grow and build and strengthen relationships within the local ecosystem.
That's fantastic, thank you. And that leads me quite neatly on my next question in a way. So you've all talked kind of really eloquently about the roles that the communities have been playing in the success of your various projects, but also I think what comes through that for me is how vital kind of your communities are in also shaping the sort of identities and values of your respective museums and galleries. And then as well as that, when we're talking about those communities, who are those communities? And I wonder whether maybe it would be interesting just to take a step back. And obviously when we talk about communities and audiences, that means various things. And so I'd really be interested to know, when you sort of use the word community, when we all use the word community, what does that mean to you in terms of your role? And how do your respective museums and galleries kind of reach or identify the needs of those different communities through the work that you do? Amy, could I turn to you first with that question?
I think in terms of this project, it's very much our quite local sort of community. So that for us is, I suppose you'd sort of call them sort of like, they're not quite villages, because the Bristol sprawl has overtaken everything around us, but it's places like Philp and Patchway, which are very much within walking distance of our museum. I think more generally, we would say that our community is much bigger than that. We sort of reach out across the entire of Bristol, North Somerset, South Gloucestershire. We're actually in South Gloucestershire, not in Bristol, which I think I realised. But for this one, because we were very much thinking about the physical link between our museum story and the effect on the lives of the people around us, that sort of walking distance area was the most suitable thing for this project. And it will probably expand beyond that in the future. But for now, it's the area where the physical landscape is affected by the aerospace industry. So we reach out to them through going out into the high street, talking to local community centres, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. Trish, obviously Goldsmiths CCA is based at Goldsmiths University, and so you've got these kind of very interesting, very different communities, and so how does that kind of shape how you think about all the sort of different strands of your work?
Yeah, it's a really unique position to be in, because the gallery is located on campus, but also it's looking outward to Lewisham more broadly, and it's the biggest visual arts centre in Lewisham. So I think what's really interesting is we're right in the middle of all these different kind of communities of practice, different residents, students, workers are kind of all kind of intersecting locally or not intersecting. But I think the gallery potentially has a real role to play in terms of mediating different experiences, connecting people. And I think that's what feels quite exciting as an area of development, to think, how can we work with students on campus and the sort of skills, the journey that they're on, and how can they support the work that we might be doing with different communities in the local area more broadly. So kind of thinking about how different, I suppose, communities we're responsible to can sort of fold in on the work that we're doing in different ways, if that makes sense. And it is a really, it's a really exciting context, because we're building on a really strong fine art tradition within the university, but also we've got lots of different sort of groups that we are aiming to work with and building those relationships with. So working with schools and young people, not trying to reach kind of every single person in the borough, but really thinking about how we can develop I suppose in-depth and longer term and sustainable relationships that are really meaningful for maybe smaller numbers of people, building on the fact that we're based on a kind of a site of learning, a site of research, and really thinking about how the space reflects over time the kind of I suppose the sensibilities of some of those different communities. So we're developing work to think about how we can develop, I suppose, strands of program with very particular groups going forward, which enable these different kind of crossings and intersections to play out.
Fascinating, thank you. Lots of so much possibility. And Karen, I was hoping you might talk a little bit more about the experience of being a Museum of the Year finalist and winner, and obviously you have this really very clear kind of local community that's so much literally a part of the fabric of your museum. But through the Museum of the Year, the kind of opportunity to reach out to new audiences and new communities, and how you thought about that, and how you decided to do that. I'd love to hear a bit more.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so the Museum of the Year award has presented an enormous opportunity for us, and in addition to that, we also have this money from the R&R, the Art Fund R&R Fund, like the other two panelists, which we're also kind of wanting to use to build on that. So this question is very much on our mind now, about not just engaging new audiences, but the new channels of participation, I guess, that we will have with and I suppose just briefly, as in addition to the community that I've talked about, we have a community of visitors who are tourists who come to the area. We're a very seasonal tourist destination here, but we also have a diaspora. And there's two diaspora in a way. There's one that are people who are from this area, but there's also a diaspora of people who have an affection for this area, visit it very regularly, and feel a deep connection to it. And I see all of these as our communities. And the Museum of the Year Award has allowed us to, I think, expand even further on that, because it has very much put us on the map. We are on the radar now, not only of people who will choose to come and visit us, but also within the museums world. And I'm seeing that every day just through the connections that I'm making, the things that I'm being asked to do by Scottish Museums Federation, Museums Heritage Highland, the Museums Association. We're also seeing at the moment that we're getting a lot more interest just from within our own area as well. Obviously, everyone else is in lockdown at the minute. We're really lucky in the Highlands that we can still move around a bit. And we're having a lot of contact from people elsewhere in the Highlands who have seen that we've won this award and think, well, that must be quite good. Let's go and have a look at that. And you perhaps saw the animation that we created as part of our Museum of the Year legacy with Ralph & Co. And that was so much fun to do. It was great to have our local artist, Dave Locke, involved in it as well. And somehow or other, we managed to persuade Sam Hewen of Outlander to do the voiceover for us, which of course got us huge attention. And I think something like 500,000 people watched that animation. It was just quite remarkable. And I actually just now cannot wait for lockdown to lift, because I genuinely think that we are going to be inundated by people from Canada and Australia and all these kind of diaspora countries that we have, who have latched on to this folklore that formed the basis of the animation. And Gairloch is the home of the Gilly Doo, and I think it's going to be amazing for the museum, but also for the wider community.
That's brilliant, thank you. An international community, not just a local one. That's fantastic. before we move on, I've got another question from the audience, which is very specifically for Amy, and I think relates to the, you know, needing and looking for people to contribute to your project. And they have asked, how did you grow your following and invest in your digital marketing?
Oh gosh. I think, well, during lockdown particularly, we really focused on sort of developing a lot of sort of accessible content, particularly for young people. What I should have talked about before is that we have a really, really strong relationship with schools and youth groups, and that side of the community, with lots and lots of schools having a really coming in to do STEM education with us. So we've always done very practical, hands-on STEM workshops with like hundreds and hundreds of schools. And so we wanted to create that kind of content that they could use in lockdown, and that really helped to sort of build up our following. So lots of sort of little downloadable activities, videos which were just little sound bites about different facts about STEM, or little bits of local history that were sort of linked in with our collection that maybe teachers and children who were learning from home could download and access and use for their learning, and also to sort of get people engaged in the little local history sound bites. And we also sort of share a lot of stuff which is related to little things that are happening. I'm sure everyone is doing this, obviously. Little bits of history day by day that sort of keep people interested, little facts of the day, little STEM things to have a little taste of things that people can just do. Yeah, so it was sort of building on the relationships we already had and transferring people over to our digital platforms during lockdown. And so, yeah, we developed a much bigger following, and we also brought along a lot of people who were interested in our digital stuff before, because suddenly we were doing so much more. I think, like I said, a lot of people have been doing a similar sort of thing, but we have had lots of really positive response to it.
Brilliant, thank you. I hope that answers the question to the audience member who asked it. That's really fascinating. Thank you very much. So that kind of brings me on to my last question. In some shape or another, and we've heard from all of you about the kind of ways that you've had to change how you engage with your communities over the last few months. And as Amy, as you were just mentioning, in particular, that focus on digital technology, online events and tours, managing relationships through Zoom, and thinking of how you use your social media. I think every one of you has mentioned social media and social media platforms as a more important way of creating dialogue. But of course, at this stage, we're all desperate to get back into our actual museums and galleries. I know I am. I am very jealous that everyone can move around in Gairloch. I'm hopeful that we'll all be able to get back soon. And obviously digital cannot replicate that face-to-face experience. No one expects it to. But we must have all learnt stuff from the last few months. And I was wondering, I'd be really interested to know what you think the benefits there are to delivering kind of activities online or offline, indeed, thinking very much about the Goldsmiths project, and how has the work that you've done over the last few months changed how you think about approaching digital projects and community connection, and how has it kind of shaped your thinking about the future? I don't know, Karen, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah. Well, I should start by saying that we had to take a real leap of faith during the week that Museum of the Year was announced. We haven't really done much online in the past at all. We have been open since the beginning of July, and we don't actually tend to do many activities during the summer because we are so busy with tourism. Our activities tend to kick in more in October, so at exactly the time that Museum of the Year was announced. So in the space of 1 week, we did our first, second and third Facebook Live streams. And we also did our first Zoom talk. And I mean, they were all just amazing. We enjoyed them enormously. And I think we discovered that we had something of a talent for it as well. And the positive things for me have been, well, for example, we can't afford the Zoom webinar subscription. It's too expensive for a small museum like us. And so we're just using the Zoom meeting one. And I thought that might be a problem, but it's not at all. We have this kind of wonderful social activity at the beginning of every talk that we've done, where people log in and have a chat and ask me what's happening in the museum, and it's just absolutely lovely to for all of us just to see other faces and catch up with people we haven't seen for so long because of lockdown. A lot of people are still, being careful about where they go and what they do, and I talked about these diaspora as well. So it had been mentioned in the past that, or questioned, could we record talks? And I don't know, we just always thought maybe it was a bit too difficult, but it turns out it's not that difficult. And when needs must, you can actually do it. And we've had such great feedback and thanks from members, because we've got quite a large membership. We've got over 500 members, and by no means all of them are in the local area. So our membership are really happy that they can now participate in these talks that we're doing, and we're not just doing the live, we're putting them on YouTube as well then, so that people can look at them afterwards. And when we get this post organised through our Art Fund Respond and Reimagine grant, I think we're determined we're going to do something special, and I'm just really excited to get working on that. Yeah. So for us, breaking down geographic boundaries because we're so remote has been a major advantage. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really exciting. I'm really excited for the future. I'm also very jealous that you've managed to crack the awkward everyone joining the Zoom moment. I think we all need to take lessons from you. You've clearly
it's because most people in our community already know each other, so they're not that shy about talking, I guess.
Maybe we just all need to pretend we know each other in future. Maybe that's the trick. Trish, can I move on to you, please? And what are you thinking about doing differently?
Yeah, so I suppose I'd echo some of what's come up already in terms of the opportunities provided by suddenly going, right, I remember when lockdown started, we had our first sort of meeting on a really bad Skype platform, and suddenly everyone's Zooming and it's all really normal. But in terms of the gallery, we've actually started working a lot more through the channel section of our website. So streaming artists' films during the first lockdown, public programming happening online, and actually, again, as Karen sort of mentioned, being able to record things easily and sort of distribute more broadly and reach broader audiences. And I suppose I've got a session with teachers tomorrow, and normally I would sort of be thinking very Lewisham focused, but I think we've actually got someone logging on from Scotland, so it's interesting when you think about what happens with that reach. We've also sort of experimented with running projects on Instagram, and again, I suppose using all of these different platforms, you think, who are you reaching, who aren't you reaching? And it's interesting with Instagram, reaching out to schools and then thinking, how are we actually reaching local schools? So kind of trying different methods, but suddenly thinking, actually, we can run a schools program online remotely. If people can't come to the gallery, let's commission the new work. So we've got a program, Friday Fact, with an artist who's made a work that can be accessed online with a big resource pack to be done in the classroom. So thinking about these really mixed approaches, and I think the value of running room to room alongside more digital options is that you really realize it brings into stark focus what these different methods of communication exchange, kind of the strengths of all of them. And I think, you know, for Zoom, being able to have that reach, being able to, I suppose, also different ways of communicating. You've got the chat, you've got, I think particularly with young people, having the chat function can be good. There's a sort of, it democratizes communication and participation in some ways, but it also flattens things, and it cuts off that, well, maybe not for you, Karen, but that sort of spontaneous chat that you can have when you're actually in a room. So I think going forward, it's about sort of probably developing a balanced approach. We think what can be done over Zoom and who can be included who otherwise wouldn't, but actually when do you really need that sort of material in-person interaction? And I think Room to Room's brought up, you know, real questions around, you know, people reflecting on the lack of touch during lockdown, and what it means to then do something physical, and actually the value of that, and the value of not just valuing digital things as well, but sort of valuing almost pre-digital, the skill sets that come with different ways of interacting, and not forgetting about those. So it's sort of, I think I'm interested in a mixed approach in a way. And whilst we're looking at, you know, the impact of how things have evolved digitally, we're also we've had time to sort of think through the space and how that's working, and how the physical experience of coming to the gallery how we might want to shift that going forward. So it's been a really sort of great time for reflecting, and a strange time as well, because I only joined the gallery just over a year ago. So, you know, started to get a sense of where I was, and then suddenly it's lockdown. And so I don't know whether what some of the stuff I've been thinking about would be different, you know, how it's been different because of lockdown, or just because I'm thinking about ways to reach different and new communities locally.
Yeah, how maybe sometimes you just pick up the phone.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Amy, how about you?
Well, I've just got to say, I completely agree with everything that the others have said. And I think that, as well as that, the thing that I've really found useful about being online is it really felt very fast paced, and, you know, sort of like that quick thinking and doing small things every single day was really good for sort of getting lots and lots of different people engaged. I think it's been great for getting younger people engaged with museums as well, and we've definitely seen that when we've come back in for the periods when we've been out of lockdown. We've had lots of sort of younger couples, younger families coming into the museum for the first time, having engaged with us digitally, and that's a great thing. So we're keen to, again, like Trish was saying, have that mixed approach, keep up the pace of our digital content, but obviously also be creating more and more on-site experiences, and think about those new audiences that we've developed through the digital platforms. Sorry, I completely blanked on what I was going to say. Yeah, sorry, I can't remember.
That's absolutely fine. That happens to me more often than I'd like to admit. So I've got a question, one last, I think time for one last, maybe two more, I don't know, questions to all of you. This is moving slightly away from the focus on kind of how we're engaging communities, how we're working digitally or not digitally, and just thinking more generally about your experience as museum professionals and as people that kind of love and work in museums. Could you all please share what challenges you foresee in 2021, and also what opportunities you think there will be? And I think we've definitely touched on some of that in the last question, but thinking more broadly, what do you think is in store? Trish, we start with you.
Challenges and opportunities. I mean, it's been such a funny year in terms of thinking, right, when are we? So back in, I don't know, April, May, going, right, I'll start planning on-site stuff for September. And it's, you know, that keeps shifting. And with it, you kind of start shifting actually your approach maybe. I mean, I think opportunities and challenges. I think another thing that we haven't really mentioned that we've been thinking a lot about at Goldsmiths CCA is just who our communities are, and the question of racial equality, kind of coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement and all the recent events around that. So I think there's challenges there, but also opportunities to work differently, to think differently, to really foreground our communities in terms of how we develop programming. So almost thinking about a shift in the gallery sort of production matrix, I suppose, and the relational matrix maybe, and thinking what's driving practice, what's driving how we work, and trying out different approaches which foreground audience needs or the needs of underrepresented groups. So I think there's lots of challenges and opportunities coming up around that, particularly in the sort of area that I'm working in. Yeah, I mean, I suppose COVID continues to be an ongoing challenge. But yeah, I suppose hopefully we're a little bit more agile and prepared and, know how to use Zoom these days. So.
Thank you. Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is definitely that unpredictability, isn't it? Of we're not quite sure how things are going to play out, particularly in the next 6 months. But I think that what this has allowed us to do is rethink everything, rethink our approaches to everything, and sort of realise what our strengths are, realise what our weaknesses are, and really be able to sort of plan for that and just totally rescope the way that we work. And the other thing that I think has been a real sort of strength that's come out of this whole situation is I think that museums collectively have come together. I've certainly in sort of my local area is that we've talked more, and working over Zoom, I think, has sort of given a lot of us a lot more time to sort of chat collectively together and share our ideas and support each other. And I think we are all doing that as a wider community across the country and the world as well. So that, I think that's a great thing to come out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I would 100% agree with all of that. Karen, what about for you?
Well, I think our major challenge is going to be our income if tourism doesn't pick up again, because we are heavily reliant on the tourist trade, and also just protecting our volunteer base when there are travellers coming from all over the world. That's something we had to think a lot about this year, but I think we are in a really good position. The Respond and Reimagine grant stands us in fantastic stead in terms of our outreach and activities and events. We can build on our Museum of the Year award, and I'm hopeful that if visits to the area can pick up again next spring, it will really take off then for us. And we're also investing some of the money from our Museum of the Year award in a couple of outdoor spaces, one at the back, which would be an archaeology trail, and one at the front overlooking the loch, where we're going to be focusing on the geology and the fishing heritage of our area. So that gives us an outdoor attraction that we can work with as well.
That sounds wonderful, and as soon as we can travel again, I am coming across to Bristol and up to Gairloch. I will be there. I will be at Goldsmiths. I am very, very excited to get out there and back to visiting museums. So we've got a couple more minutes, and before we close, I'd really like to ask you all one final question. Thinking about the last 9 months and all of us sitting in our houses and engaging so much online, what's been the best thing that you've seen online from another museum over these past few months? What are your kind of top recommendations for kind of culture online? I don't know who wants to start. Karen.
just one that I think would really appeal to your art partners is the Occupy White Walls game. I don't know if anyone has had a go at that. So it's a sandbox, what they call a sandbox video game, where you can create your own art gallery, and you get to design it architecturally, but you also get to purchase and to populate it with artworks. And it's a whole range of artworks that museums have contributed, but also modern and digital art as well. So yeah, I think that's a really exciting game, and one that would appeal to your members.
That sounds fantastic. How can we access that? Is it you just stick white walls art game into Google?
Occupy White Walls, it's called. So just Google it and it'll take you to the website.
There are 52 people Googling right now. I hope. Who's next? Who's got recommendations?
I can go.
Go on, Trish.
So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking there's so much stuff online, and I feel like I haven't accessed, I suppose, like juggling, doing the juggle of family, work life. I'm sort of thinking about that question, I suppose, in relation to having kept up to speed with lots of different resources that galleries and museums are putting out, and there's such a wealth of amazing material out there that wasn't there before. And I think one thing that that appeals to me, and particularly in the context of this, is a zine that MIMA have, Middlesbrough Institute for Modern Art, put out, MIMA Zina, which is the community produced publication that comes out and sort of spans their collection, but also lots of different contributions from different people in the community. So it felt like a relevant one to plug today.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, we love MIMA. They're an amazing gallery. And Amy.
I think my recommendations are very kiddie, I think, in comparison to everyone else's.
I have a 3-year-old, bring it on.
I really love the Natural History Museum's Which Dinosaur Are You? I think that's a cool quiz to have a go at, so definitely try that. I was quite surprised to find out that I'm a Gigantosaurus, but there we go. And the other thing, slightly less museumsy, but something which I think a lot of families really will appreciate, is National Museum of Wales are doing like a virtual sort of day with Santa in a couple of weeks. And I thought that was really nice, because like we can't have our Santa's grottos, what with restrictions and whatnot. And that was something, apparently it's via Zoom, Mrs. Christmas is going to cook cookies with you and do a sing along with the elves and things like that. And I just thought that was lovely.
Thank you so much. I actually think that's an absolutely wonderful example to end on, of museums at the heart of their communities in wholly unexpected and completely joyful ways. So thank you so much, Amy, Karen and Trish, for joining us. And thank you to those of you in the audience who shared your questions. I wish we could keep going and get through some more of them, but we're nearly out of time and everyone's evenings are calling. But before I go, I just wanted to say that hopefully many of you in the audience today will have seen that last week we launched our crowdfunding campaign, Together for Museums. Through Together for Museums, Art Fund is aiming to raise £1 million to further support our wonderful museums and galleries during these challenging times, and to make more of the kind of grants that you've heard a little bit about today. So if you haven't already, please go to artfund.org and check out the really brilliant artist rewards that are on offer for your donations. Your support really is vital to ensure that we can help as many projects like the ones you heard about today in the future. And finally, bang on time, a huge thank you to our wonderful panel for taking the time to speak to us today. Karen, Trish and Amy, thank you very, very much. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and goodbye for now.